It's 1695. Deep in the forests of northeastern Brazil, a man is running, wounded, hunted, with just a handful of loyal men by his side. He had spent over 2 decades going up against one of the most powerful empires on the planet. He built a nation from nothing. He turned down every deal they threw at him because none of them came with the one thing he actually wanted: freedom. His name was Zumbi, and on November 20th of that year, they finally caught up with him. But this story doesn't start with his death. It starts way earlier, with a boy born free in a land the world refused to recognize. Zumbi was born around 1655, free, right in the heart of Quilombo dos Palmares, a community of escaped Africans hidden deep in the forests of what is now the state of Alagoas in northeastern Brazil. Born free, let that sink in a country where slavery was the law of the land, where Africans were treated like property. Zumbi came into this world with no chains, but that freedom didn't last long. Still just a kid, around 6 years old, he was captured during a Portuguese raid on the Quilombo. He was handed over to a Jesuit priest named Antonio Melo in a town called Porto Calvo. The priest baptized him Francisco. For years he taught him Portuguese, Latin, Catholic doctrine. By all accounts, Zumbi was incredibly sharp, a fast learner, articulate, someone who picked up on the logic of the European world like nobody's business. The priest thought he was saving a soul. What he was actually doing was training a strategist, because at 15 years old, Zumbi just vanished. He crossed dense forests and hostile terrain alone and made his way back to Palmares. He came back a different person. Now he knew the enemy's language, their mindset, their military playbook. He knew how they thought, how they planned, how they attacked, and that made him the most dangerous man the Portuguese had ever faced in Brazil. To really get who Zumbi was, you got to understand the world he grew up in. Palmares wasn't just some hideout for runaways. It was a full-on nation. At its peak, it was a confederation of over 11 villages spread across the Serra da Barriga Mountains, with a population estimated between 20,000 and 30,000 people. To put that in perspective, that was bigger than most colonial cities in Brazil at the time. Its people came from everywhere. Africans from different ethnic groups, Bantu, Angolan, Congolese, indigenous people looking for refuge, mixed-race Brazilians, even Portuguese guys dodging forced military service. And together they built something real from scratch. They grew cassava, corn, sugarcane, fruit. They raised livestock. From the palm trees that gave the place its name, they made oil, wine, raw materials for baskets, mats, and tools. They traded with nearby towns. They had their own government, a king, war captains, village chiefs. They had laws. They had religious ceremonies that blended African traditions with indigenous influences. And they had a defense system that drove Portuguese military commanders absolutely crazy. They built their settlements on high ground, camouflaged in the vegetation. They dug hidden ditches lined with sharp stakes. They laid fake roads that led soldiers straight into ambushes. They hit at night, disappeared into the forest, then popped up somewhere else. For the Portuguese colonizers, Palmares was an existential threat, not just militarily, but symbolically. As long as Palmares was standing, every enslaved person knew there was another option, that freedom wasn't just a dream, that you could actually get there. Back in Palmares, Zumbi rose through the ranks fast. He was young, but he had something most people didn't: the combination of being raised inside the enemy system and having an unshakable loyalty to his own people. He could fight, he could think, he could speak Portuguese and Latin when it counted. He became the military leader. He earned the respect of the warriors. He earned the trust of the people. But 1678 is when everything flipped. The king of Palmares at the time was Ganga Zumba, Zumbi's own uncle. worn down by decades of war, he took a deal offered by the governor of Pernambuco, a peace treaty. The terms sounded okay on paper. Freedom recognized for everyone born in Palmares, their own territory guaranteed. But the catch? Palmares had to pledge loyalty to the Portuguese crown and return every future runaway slave. For Gonga Zumba, it was a shot at survival. Or Zumbi, it was straight up betrayal. How could you accept freedom for some, while others were still getting whipped on plantations? How could you send back to slavery the people who risked everything to be free? Zumbi said no, out loud, in front of everyone. And he led the ones who felt the same, the ones who'd rather die on their feet than live on their knees. The split was total. Not long after, Ganga Zumba was poisoned. Historians still debate the exact circumstances, but most sources point to people in Zumbi's camp or others who opposed the treaty. At around 25 years old, Zumbi became king of Palmares, and from day one his message was crystal clear. No more deals, no more negotiations, just resistance. In a Brazil where Africans were treated like animals, where the law literally gave slaveholders the right to kill, where kids were born enslaved and died enslaved, Zumbi represented something priceless, proof that it was possible. Palmares was living proof that freedom wasn't just a fantasy, that you could build a real life, that you could raise your kids with their own name, their own language, their own identity. Every enslaved person who heard about Palmares knew there was a place, there was a way out, there were people on the other side who had made it. Zumbi built that, he organized it, he defended it, and he refused every deal that would have left the most vulnerable behind. He fought for over 15 years against one of the biggest colonial empires in the world, with spears, ambushes, and knowledge of the land, going up against cannons and professional armies. 6 Portuguese military expeditions between 1680 and 1686, all of them failed because there was someone on the other side who simply wasn't going to budge, but the walls were closing in. In 1692, the Portuguese Crown called in Domingos Jorge Velho, the most ruthless bandeirante in Brazil, with one job: wipe Palmares off the map once and for all. In January of 1694, with over 1,000 men and heavy artillery, the final assault came. Macaco, the capital, held out for weeks, but the gap in firepower was just too massive. The fortress fell, the villages were burned, the crops destroyed. Zumbi slipped out through the forest, wounded. With just a handful of loyal men left, for almost a year, he became a legend. People said he was immortal, that the forest was protecting him. But the reality was brutal. He was hiding between rocks and roots, hunted around the clock. And in the end, it was betrayal that got him. A former ally, captured by Jorge Velho's forces, gave up his location in exchange for his own life. On November 20th, 1695, the troops surrounded the hideout. Zumbi was captured, already weakened, already wounded and killed. His head was taken to Recife and put on public display. The message was supposed to be, "It's over, don't even think about it." But that message didn't land. Palmares fell. Zumbi died, but what he stood for didn't die with him. Today, November 20th, the day of his death, is Black Consciousness Day in Brazil. A man born in one of the most brutal eras in human history, who saw the world clearly and chose the hardest path because it was the only honest one. The world just hasn't caught up to his story yet. Had you ever heard of Palmares before this video? Most Americans only learn about slavery through a US lens. But resistance to slavery was an America's wide phenomenon, and Palmares is one of its most extraordinary chapters. A man born free, ripped away from everything, who learned the enemy's world from the inside, and used that knowledge to fight for his people until his very last day. This story needed to be told.